New York City, May 1931. 15,000 people are packed onto the sidewalks of West End Avenue, necks craned upward, watching the largest manhunt the city has ever seen reach its end. On the top floor of an apartment building, one young man is holding off more than 100 police officers. His name is Francis Crowley. The newspapers call him Two-Gun Crowley, and he is wanted for shooting a policeman dead. For nearly 2 hours, tear gas and machine gun fire pour into the building. Crowley fires back through the walls, and somewhere in the middle of that gun battle, bleeding, surrounded with no way out, he stops, and he writes a letter, to whom it may concern. Under my coat, he writes, is a weary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm. A few months later, he sat down in the electric chair at Sing Sing, still believing exactly that. He was 19 years old. Now here's the part that should unsettle you. Crowley wasn't unusual. Al Capone, the most feared gangster in America, called himself a public benefactor, a misunderstood man who'd only ever tried to give people a good time. The warden of Sing Sing prison said almost none of the men locked inside thought of themselves as bad people at all. So if the worst human beings who ever lived never blamed themselves for anything, what exactly do you expect to happen when you point out your co-worker's mistake? That's where Dale Carnegie begins the whole book. Not with a clever tactic, with a warning. The first of 3 fundamentals, the ground everything else is built on. And it's this: don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Sounds too soft to matter. It isn't, because criticism doesn't do what we think it does. We imagine we're correcting someone, handing them a useful fact about themselves. What we're actually doing is wounding their pride and backing them into a corner, where the only instinct left is to justify themselves and resent us for it. John Wanamaker, who built one of America's great department store fortunes, said it flatly, I learned 30 years ago that it is foolish to scold. The man who understood this best was running a country at war. July 1863. The Battle of Gettysburg has just ended, and General Lee's army is retreating south until it reaches the Potomac River, swollen with rain, impossible to cross. Lee is trapped. A flooded river ahead of him, a victorious Union army behind. President Lincoln sees it instantly. This is the chance to capture Lee's army and end the Civil War. He orders his General Meade to attack at once, and Meade hesitates. Calls a council of war, delays. The river drops, Lee slips across, and the war that might have ended that week grinds on for 2 more years. Lincoln is devastated. So he sits down and writes Meade a letter. I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape, he writes. Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably. It is the most justified rebuke you can imagine, and Lincoln never sent it. They found it among his papers after his death, unsigned, filed away in his own hand, to General Meade, never sent. The wisest man in the country had every right to let that general have it, and he understood it would change nothing, that Meade would only defend himself and resent his commander. So he wrote the words to get them out of his chest, and he put them in a drawer. That's the principle. If you want the honey, don't kick over the beehive. Criticism feels productive. It almost never is, which leaves an obvious problem. If you can't criticize people into changing, how do you move them at all? Carnegie's answer runs underneath the entire book. There is only one way to get anyone to do anything, and that's to make them want to do it. You can force people with threats, sure, but only until your back is turned. Real influence comes from feeding something people are quietly starving for. The psychologist William James called it the deepest principle in human nature. Not the wish, not the desire, the craving to be appreciated. Almost nobody feeds it. So the person who does becomes unforgettable. Take Charles Schwab. In the early 1900s, he became one of the first men in America paid more than $1 million a year, back when a dollar was a dollar and there was no income tax. Andrew Carnegie handed him that fortune to run the largest steel company on earth. Not because Schwab knew the most about making steel. He said himself that plenty of his own employees knew more about it than he did. He was paid that staggering sum almost entirely for his ability to handle people. And when he was asked his secret, here's what he said: "I am hearty in my approbation and lavish in my praise." That's the whole trick. He praised people sincerely and constantly, and the best of them ran through walls for him. Carnegie first saw it as a boy on a Missouri farm, watching his father win blue ribbons for his hogs at the county fair. The hogs couldn't have cared less about the ribbons, but his father cared enormously, pinned them on a long sheet of muslin, and showed them to every visitor. The recognition gave him a feeling of importance, the same feeling every person you meet tomorrow is hungry for. One warning, and Carnegie is firm about it: this is not flattery. Flattery is counterfeit, telling people what they want to hear, and most people can smell it coming. The difference is sincerity. Appreciation is finding the thing that is genuinely good and actually saying it out loud, which is the part nearly everyone skips. As the old couplet goes, "Once I did bad, and that I heard ever. Twice I did good, but that I heard never." There's a third fundamental, and it's the one that ties the first two together. Carnegie liked to explain it with fishing. "I'm very fond of strawberries and cream," he said, "but for some reason, fish prefer worms. So when I go fishing, I don't bait the hook with what I want. I bait it with what the fish wants. Obvious when it's a fish. We forget it the instant it's a person. We march up to people and talk about what we want, then wonder why they don't budge. The people who really get this can make it look like magic." Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of the great minds of his century, once tried to get a calf into a barn with his son. They did the natural thing. Emerson pushed, the boy pulled. And the calf did exactly what they were doing, thought only about what it wanted, stiffened its legs, and refused to move. Then the Irish housemaid wandered by. She couldn't write essays like Emerson, but she thought about what the calf wanted, slipped her finger into its mouth, let it suck, and calmly led it inside. Or take Andrew Carnegie himself. His two young nephews were away at Yale, far too busy to answer their mother's worried letters. Carnegie bet that he could get a reply by return mail without even asking for one. He wrote the boys a warm, chatty note, and mentioned near the end that he was enclosing a $5 bill for each of them. Then he sealed the envelope and left the money out. Back came 2 grateful replies by return mail, thanking dear Uncle Andrew for his kind note, and asking ever so gently about the enclosure he'd somehow forgotten. Every one of these works for the same reason. Somebody stopped asking what do I want and started asking what do they want. Henry Ford put it about as plainly as it can be put. If there is any one secret of success, it's the ability to see things from the other person's angle as well as your own. And there's the shape of it. 3 fundamentals: don't criticize, give honest appreciation, arouse an eager want, that look like 3 separate rules but are really one idea seen from 3 sides. It's the idea Carnegie spent 30 years watching people prove. You are not dealing with creatures of logic. You're dealing with creatures of pride, driven by a deep hunger to feel important. Criticism starves that hunger and makes enemies of people. Appreciation feeds it. And framing things around what the other person wants is simply what it looks like to take that hunger seriously instead of fighting it. Everything else in this book, every technique we'll get to, sits on top of these 3. They are the operating system. Get them wrong, and no clever move will save you. Get them right, and you'll barely need the clever moves. Which leads straight to the question the rest of the book is really about: how do you get someone to actually like you? On purpose, quickly, even in a first meeting. Carnegie's answer is a little humbling. He says the greatest winner of friends you will ever meet figured it out long ago, without reading a single word of this. And it'll be waiting for you at the door tonight, wagging its tail. Next time, what a dog knows that you've forgotten.